Hello YouTube. Today I'm going to engage in a bit of a self-roast because I'm going to be criticizing a type of fitness video that I have personally made in the past and more than once. I have an actual full series of tier lists where I covered every single muscle group, and if you missed them, they're in the description for you. You might have noticed that I'm not the only one to do that, however, because it's a format that is incredibly popular. If you want to get a lot of views, if you want to get a lot of engagement and watch time, you must make a tier list. For the simple reason that you know that it's going to tap into people's emotions. People are going to check out the video to see if their favorite list is going to make it on your S tier, and they're also going to naturally be very mad if it doesn't. So if you shit on their favorite list, you still get engagement because these people are going to argue with you in the comments. And I know that for a fact because when I made a biceps exercises tier list and I put the incline curl in the C tier, the reactions I got were stupendous. Funnily enough, I ended up changing my mind on the lift and realizing it was actually S tier. But this is something I'm going to discuss later. All of that to say that if you want a format that you know is going to get you views, you make a tier list. It also plays off of people's fear of missing out because oftentimes when you are lifting, you think, what if there is this one mythical lift out there that I don't do that could get me great gains and I'm not actually tapping into that? Well, you click on the tier list to find out. And the opposite is also true. Maybe you spend a lot of energy on a lift that is actually D tier and would get you nowhere. And you would want to be warned of that before you waste years and years of your energy on that specific movement. We will see that this as well tends to be just a phantom of a thought. It's not actually really possible, but that is the mindset behind the popularity of the tier list. And I think talking about mindset here is the exact right choice of word because we're talking about the human psyche. And if there is something that the human psyche cannot resist, it is a hierarchy. It is a gradation of value. It is a list from best to worst. Our spirit, be it naturally or because of society, gravitates towards that format because it feels good. It feels good to have everything organized, to know what is good and what is bad, even if it's based on nothing tangible. It doesn't just stop at tier lists. We do that in every stratus of society. We like to give grades to things. Shit, our entire public school and education system is based off of that very notion. The issue being naturally that every hierarchy is subjective by nature. It is the result and the creation of the people that partook in it, that created its structure, and then that are placed within it. In a sense, a hierarchy is a form of morality. Now, fear not, this is not a philosophy video, but I think it's important to let you guys know that because it connects to why I wanted to make this video in the first place, which is the inherent subjectivity of the tier list format in itself. Every time you click on a tier list video, in essence, you are downloading the subjectivity of whoever made that tier list. And since subjectivity predates objectivity and reason in most cases, what you end up with is a list of movements that a given fitness influencer likes or dislikes, and then based on that like or dislike, they're going to try and find reasons to explain why they feel that way in order to convince you. And I think this is the reason why you could justly conclude that tier lists are stupid. Take every single tier list made by bodybuilders or lifters, mine, Jeff Nippard's, Bromley's, Bonham Man, Team 3D Alpha, and try and see if they match. And you will find that they don't. Why? Because the people that created them have different subjectivities. So it is very tempting to just go off of that and say, well, this means that tier lists are stupid, and worse than that, because I've seen people go to that conclusion to say that there is no such thing as a good lift for hypertrophy and that every single lift is equal. And this is when we start to verse into a dangerous type of relativism where we completely squash any gradation of values and we destroy hierarchies because we have perceived the human flaw in the hierarchy, leading us to believe that the hierarchy in itself is useless. And that is not the case. Humans create hierarchies for a reason. What makes a good hierarchy then are the objective principles and metrics that it uses to judge the things that it attempts to grade or value. And that is exactly the actual point of this video. I'm going to go behind the scenes and I'm going to share with you guys the metrics that I use myself to judge if a lift is good or bad for hypertrophy so that you can make your own opinion. You can understand the mechanism behind the hierarchy. So that will be my top 10 most important metrics to judge if a lift is good for hypertrophy. But before I share that list with you guys, please remember that if you want to support the channel and if you like the videos, you can do so by clicking the first link in the description. It's the coffee page. You can pledge $3 to $5 a month. And even though it doesn't look like much to you, if enough people do it, it allows me to spend more time making content. All right, with that out of the way, here are the metrics that I personally go to judge if a lift is good or bad for hypertrophy. We're going to start, and I'm not going to give them in order of importance. That will come later. 1. Stability. How easy it is to keep the body and joints at the proper angle to hit the target muscle with minimal deviation. Example, if you compare a standing overhead press and a seated overhead press or a seated AD press, the one that has the most stability is the seated AD press because your hips and knees are not factors, so they're not going to shift around. The position of your elbow is going to be stable. You're not going to be able to tilt your torso back to make the lift easier. Overall, it makes standardizing your form an easy task, and this is what we want for bodybuilding. Now, it does not mean that an unstable lift is necessarily a bad lift. Case in point, the rings, but we'll be talking about that later when I go back to explain every single metric. Number 2, stimulus to fatigue ratio. How much overall fatigue the lift has you accumulate versus how much stimulus for the target muscle you receive. Another example, deadlifts versus hamstring curls for hamstrings. What has the best stimulus to fatigue ratio? Well, in this case, for our specific target muscle, it is the hamstring curl, because you're going to accumulate almost no CNS fatigue, you're not going to get any lower back fatigue, etc., etc. Does it mean that the hamstring curl is a better lift for hypertrophy than the deadlift? Not necessarily, because you get much less overall stimulus. And this is why context is so important when discussing stimulus to fatigue ratio. Another example, barbell cheat curls versus preacher curls for the biceps. The stimulus to fatigue ratio is much better with preacher curls because your shoulder is frozen and you can focus on the bicep in particular. A cheat curl will have you use more body English, you might get more overall stimulus, but for the biceps, it's not the right choice. Number 3, progression consistency. This one is pretty much self-explanatory. How consistently are you able to add weight to the movement? Number 4, soreness. How much you feel the target muscle days after you have trained it with a given exercise. 5, easy on the joint. How much tension the lift puts on the structure, so the bones, the actual skeleton, the tendons, and the ligaments, as opposed to how much they target the muscle. 6, active range of motion, that we also sometimes call mechanical tension. They're not necessarily the same thing, but I'm going to use them both for that same entry of the list because they mean the same thing in that context. How much tension is kept on the muscle throughout the weight's travel distance, and how relevant is the resistance profile of the lift to training this specific muscle. An example being the pullover. If you look at the pullover, some people will say that the resistance profile means it's a lift for the chest. Some people, like myself, say it's a lift for the lats or the triceps. There's a lot of discussion nowadays about what actually activates the triceps. Is it the stretch? Is it the overhead position? It is the squeeze? Is it whatever? All of that plays into the notion of an active range of motion of the lift. And this active range of motion taps into the idea that there is mechanical tension at certain portion of the movement, and the more mechanical tension you get for the muscle, the better the lift is for hypertrophy. Then 7, we have ease of use. How easy and quick is the exercise to set up? 8, we have low cardiovascular impact. Does the lift allow you to reach muscular failure, or do you reach cardiovascular failure first? Number 9, we have comfort. Does the lift hurt? I know it might sound silly, but that is important because if you do something kneeling on the floor and it's a hard floor, your knees are going to hurt. That is not pleasant. Some lifts have an awkward stance that doesn't feel good. You have certain things that put pressure on the tendon. Recently, I got given a Yusufel stone that strongman used, and carrying it the normal way is horrible because it wrecks the tendons of my biceps and forearms. So I actually found another way to carry it where I carry it like a big pot with my fingers and my hands underneath the thing. It is much more difficult, but it's also much more comfortable. As a bodybuilder, I prefer that. And then number 10, we have enjoyment. How much fun are you having during the movement? Do you enjoy yourself lifting? So that was the list in a random order. Now I'm going to rank it by order of importance, with 10 being the least important and 1 being the most important for hypertrophy. Number 10, we have soreness. To me, soreness is not that important for the simple reason that it's a widely inconsistent metric. The point of having objective metrics to make tier lists to grade and judge movements for hypertrophy is the ability to apply them across the board. The problem is that a lift that makes a person very sore is not going to make another person very sore. And even within that same individual, once your muscle adapts to the lift, you will be less and less sore. So we cannot really use that metric that much because it's way too volatile. And it's also true that just because you get sore does not mean you got a good stimulus. Sometimes getting sore just means that you have poor recovery. It's the way that your muscle uses to say, hey, I'm in a sense not overtrained, but I'm taxed and I need time to recover. So it might just be an indication that your work capacity is garbage. However, I'm also not the type to say that it's completely useless, because I've found that if a movement produces soreness consistently, and by consistently I mean for years and years after you started doing it, then this must mean that the target muscle gets a really good workout from that movement. At least that is my conclusion. If you want examples of lifts that produce that, for me, the RDL. I have never had a serious session of RDLs that didn't result in crazy soreness or DOMs in my hamstrings and glutes. So I keep doing them because I see that, to me, they work. We also can use soreness as a tool to figure out which lift activates which muscle, which is the, in a sense, practical pendant of biomechanics, because you take the pullover, for example. I know people who fold the pullovers in their triceps. And the only way to figure that out is to do pullovers and to get sore in your triceps. That is why it is number 10. Number 9 is comfort. And this is naturally what gets bodybuilders a reputation of being prima donna and pussies, because we tend to value comfort very highly, as opposed to people like powerlifters or strongman who actually are the exact opposite. If you train strongman, you have a screw loose and you most likely like pain, because every lift you do is painful and uncomfortable. That is part of the sport. So if as a strongman you train in a way that is comfortable and you seek comfort, you're going to be a shit strongman. As a bodybuilder, it's the exact opposite. We want comfort, we want to maximize comfort, not because we train like pussies, but rather because it's super important for hypertrophy. Since hypertrophy is both a performance factor and a metric, we have to have everything else to the side to be able to maximize that. Example, you are going to do a set of preacher curls, right? You want to push to muscular failure, but if you do preacher curls on your knees, using your legs as the station for the preacher curl, like I've seen some people do, you'll never be able to do that. Because that position is 1, deeply unstable, 2, deeply uncomfortable. You will never reach true failure in that fashion. Which is why, as a bodybuilder, I insist on having a very comfortable gym. I insist on using very comfortable machines, because it allows me to get uncomfortable. It allows me to push deep into the discomfort that is muscle failure. Then there's also the fact that pain as a psychological stimulus can take away from your focus. When I'm lifting, I want to be in the muscle, I want to be in the moment. If I feel pain, I'm not going to be able to do that. And if you disagree with that, I guarantee you that when you do hip thrusts, you don't do hip thrusts with just the barbell, because it hurts your hips, and so you cannot push as much. So you use a pussy pad. Comfort as a rule is something that we have developed as humans because, while yes, it can make us weaker and softer, it can also make us harder and stronger if we know how to use it. Then we have number 8, low cardiovascular impact. And this is relevant for the same reason as comfort. It's because if you want to be able to push to muscular failure and your lungs and heart fail first, that is not going to happen. And so your muscular gains and hypertrophy gains are going to be reduced. Of course, this is contextual and depends on the individual. If you get winded by a set of curls, if a set of squats completely takes the wind out of you, that's not the sign that the lift is bad for hypertrophy. It's just the sign that you have piss poor cardiovascular endurance and you have to work on that. This is why cardio is so important for bodybuilders. One, for your health, but also because it allows you to become a better bodybuilder because it makes you better at hypertrophy training. And this is why I recommend high intensity cardio for bodybuilders, so 10 to 15 minutes where you really get your heart pumping, and also low intensity on the side, like hikes, like swimming, that gives you a good baseline. Supersets are also an excellent way to include additional cardiovascular resistance training into your hypertrophy split without losing on any performance. The reason why I still rank the cardiovascular profile of a lift so low is because you have certain movements where it's going to be unavoidable. So lower body stuff, yeah, is going to like wind you a bit. That doesn't mean that these movements are bad, but it means that they can be optimized. So for example, a split squat, if you do a split squat by grabbing onto the dumbbells, you will find that it's very, very taxing. If you do it with an SSB or the Smith machine, suddenly you get much stronger with less cardiovascular tax. So this means that this version of the split squat is much better than the dumbbell variation for bodybuilders. Number 7 is on the joints, and this becomes the more relevant the older you get. For me, it's number 7. A bodybuilder that has been training for 10 years more than me, who is in their 40s, might rank this at number 2 or number 3. Because at some point, what limits you in the game of hypertrophy is no longer the muscle's ability to recover or to grow, it's the tendon. The tendon starts to hurt, it feels beat up, and when your tendon is beat up, you cannot train the muscle, and so you stagnate or you even regress. And this is probably the one problematic that makes it hard to start hypertrophy and bodybuilding later on in age. It's not because you are not able to build muscle at 30, 40, it's because most likely your joints are tired, they're taxed. Especially if you used to be a strength athlete or an actual professional athlete, or you played like collegiate level sport, yeah, your tendons got a beating. Bodybuilding, proper natural bodybuilding, reinforces the tendon, but there is a limit to how much you can reinforce. Muscles like the tricep are notorious for being limited by the health of your tendon, muscles like the quads by your knees, etc., etc. So it's super important to select movements that either reinforce the tendon or are easy on the tendon. And I want to make clear that as a bodybuilder, it's not always a bad idea to dodge movements that make you feel bad. We are not movement enthusiasts. I know that a lot of people will push these movements that make you feel bad, saying you have to get acclimated to them. Sometimes that is true because it means that there is a lack of robust mobility. Sometimes it just means that the lift sucks for hypertrophy and it can be dodged. An example being wrist curls. The majority of people who don't like wrist curls don't like them because they do them with a certain end goal, they do them with a dumbbell that is fixed with no collar that rotates, and that feels absolutely horrible on the wrist, and you don't even feel it in your forearm. So what is the point? It's a bad lift for hypertrophy. Shoulder pain with certain presses is another one. A lot of people feel it with a straight barbell on a flat bench. There is no reason to keep doing that. There are other lifts that are better for hypertrophy. For example, the exact same press but with dumbbells. You have some people who get bicep tendinitis on certain supinated motions for the biceps with a straight bar. Why insist on trying to do that when you could just get a bar, like an easy bar, that is better adapted and would reduce the pain, etc., etc. This is why it's at number 7. Then we have number 6, stability, and this one, naturally, is up for debate. A lot of people disagree with that. This is also part of the reason why bodybuilders get a reputation for being sissies. It's because a lot of people are going to look at a lift, and the more, in a sense, reckless or the more visually exciting the lift is, the higher they are going to rank it. For bodybuilding, it's the exact opposite. I'm not a circus act. I don't want to do things that look good or impressive. I want to look impressive. And oftentimes the movements that make you look tremendous down the line are the simple, true and tested ones that look boring in the gym. And that includes stuff like the Smith machine that people like to shit on. The Smith machine, I've said it in the past, was created by Jacques Lalanne because he saw the limitations of a barbell and free weight, and he wanted all of the advantages of pushing heavy weight with stability. Hence, the Smith machine that is present in every serious bodybuilding gym. You have cables. Cables have a reputation for being for novices, or people use cables, don't train hard. Nonsense. Cables actually are for people who like to train hard, because since they give you so much stability, you can push to your absolute limit. Compare a dumbbell lateral raise with a cuffed cable lateral raise, and you will find that you can use more weight on the lateral raises with the cable and get more reps and get better results. Why? Heightened stability. The cable keeps the movement in the proper axis. The cable gives you an accentuated amount of tension on the negative that you don't have to control because the cable stack controls it for you, so you can focus on the tension on the muscle, etc., etc. Then we have number 5, stimulus to fatigue ratio. And this is where the divide begins, not with other practitioners and other lifters, but with bodybuilders, because I know for a fact that many of my colleagues, enhanced or not, might place stimulus to fatigue ratio much, much higher. I personally don't, because I also see it as an excuse that a lot of people who say they train for hypertrophy are going to apply to justify sticking to machines and avoiding heavy free weight compound movements by pointing them out as having a bad stimulus to fatigue ratio, which is not always the case. Because we always have to remember that fatigue is stimulus, which oftentimes means that a lift that has a great stimulus ratio as opposed to the fatigue it has you accrue doesn't give you much of each. So sure, you don't get much fatigue, but you also don't get much stimulus. But that is mostly for big compound movements, for the big muscle groups. For stuff like the smaller muscle groups, it makes a lot more sense to apply that principle. Because the idea behind it, and the reason why it was promoted by bodybuilders and not strength athletes in particular, is that since you're supposed to target every single muscle of your body, at least if you're serious about having a complete physique, you're going to have to pay attention to the amount of fatigue that you accumulate, because soon enough it becomes impossible to manage. Once you isolate forearms, biceps, triceps, calves, core, back, traps, chest, you end up with so many moving parts that your program becomes this nightmare of fatigue. And if you can cut away from that fatigue as much as possible and get more stimulus, that is something that you really want to be doing. Because if you don't do that, soon enough what you find is that your training frequency starts to drop because you're not able to recover, so you're not able to be fresh for the next training session. The quality of your sets is damaged because you're constantly tired, and so you cannot have hard sets. You cannot really push to failure every single time. And as we all know, intensity is super important for hypertrophy. It might even be the name of the game. And also, down the line, paradoxically, it's going to reduce the total amount of volume you're getting because so much of it is going to be garbage. It's not actually going to result in anything in terms of stimulus. And I think it's super important to understand the justification behind the principle, because that way you understand that two different individuals that are both lifters are going to have a completely different outtake on it. If you looked at the videos that Eric Bugenhagen made to quote-unquote judge Jeff Nippard's videos, this is where the divide comes. Bugenhagen has this mindset of big mover where to him, fatigue is just a word. He doesn't give a fuck about the ratio. He will always prioritize movements that give you a lot of fatigue and a lot of stimulus because it aligns with his methodology of training. It aligns with the way he's built his body. Jeff Nippard is not like that. Jeff Nippard is going to approach it with a much more precise approach, where he's going to decorticate each lift, because if you look at the way he programs, he has this tendency to have complex days with a bunch of lifts that compete for recovery, and so he wants every single lift to have as little fatigue as possible so as to make sure you can accumulate as much stimulus as possible. So I was long-winded, but just to say that there is such a thing as a stimulus to fatigue ratio, and yes, you want to pay attention to it. Then, number 4, might be a shock to some of you guys, ease of use. I know that it's very high, but to me it's key, because from experience, if a lift takes more than 3 minutes to set up, you will not be doing it. You will be skipping it every single time, because when you're in the gym, you're in go mode, it's so annoying to break your momentum and have to drag the bench to the cable station, figure out the angle of the cables, then move it. You do your first set, it doesn't feel right, you modify the angle. Why don't I just grab a pair of fucking dumbbells with a set incline and I do it? This is what happened to me, where I was doing this press with cables for the upper chest. And sure, when I got the angles right, it was tremendous. But that was 20% of the time, and it took way too much time and energy. So instead, I now do dumbbell incline press, and I get 90% of the same results. So even though technically the cable variation is better for hypertrophy on paper, based on certain metrics, since its ease of use is so terrible, it actually is worse down the line for hypertrophy. Then we have number 3, active range of motion / mechanical tension. And the reason why this one is so high, and the reason why it's not controversial at all, is because pretty much everyone agrees with that one. Even the people like me and others who shit on biomechanics gurus will still tell you that biomechanics are very important. What we disagree with is the interpretation of the data that these people make, because they use it for their own agenda. I'm not going to get into that. I spoke about that in the past. This is sort of what is amusing with that metric. We all agree it's important, but no one can agree on how to use it, because no one can agree on which lift activates what muscle during which portion of the range of motion. Even with all the science out there, the bickering is non-stop. By the way, funnily enough, you would think that experience-based lifters would be the ones who bicker the most, because at the end of the day, we're just subjective creatures and we just compare opinions. But that's not the case. No one bickers more than science-based fitness creators. They're like old ladies at the park. It is so amusing to see. Then we have number 2, progression consistency. And this one to me has to be at the top of the list, because above everything else, if a lift doesn't progress consistently, if you're not able to add weight and to build up on the mechanical tension, then it cannot be a good lift for hypertrophy. I don't give a fuck how good the resistance profile is. I don't care how good the fatigue to stimulus ratio is. I don't care if it's stable, if it's comfortable, if it's joint friendly, if it's easy to set up, if it makes you sore. I don't care. None of that is actually relevant if you're not able to progressively overload on the lift. That's it. Now, keep in mind that progression is relative to the muscle that you are attempting to hit. So most bicep isolation, once you're past the novice stage or the neurological adaptation of a new movement, you might see a 5 to 10 pound progress each year. That is normal, right? That is not the sign that the lift is bad for hypertrophy. And sometimes you can, in a sense, understand logically why that lift is bad and why it doesn't progress, resistance profile being one, inability to grind being another. Sometimes it's just you. It's just that the lift doesn't align with you, and in that case, ditch it. There is no point in just banging your head against the wall. Pick another variation of the same movement pattern that targets the muscle, and I guarantee you that you will see tremendous progress. Case in point for me, bench press, horrible plateaus for years and years, move to dips, weighted dips, and suddenly no more plateaus, and progression is doing this. It's always good as a bodybuilder to keep an open mind and to experiment. Then we have number 1, the king of kings, the most important thing for hypertrophy, and that is enjoyment. Enjoyment, that's it. How much do you like the lift? This has nothing to do with objective criteria and all of the metrics that I cited before, because they're all irrelevant in the face of that one thing. Even if a movement on paper has all of the qualities I cited previously, it's all for nothing if you don't like it, because you'll find excuses to skip, you won't put your heart into it, so you won't be intense, and down the line, you will see no progression, so no results. To pull a citation from Grappler Baki, it is impossible to beat someone who is having fun. It's a message I've tried to impress upon you guys for a very long time, and I will keep doing that. If you have the best possible program crafted by an hypertrophy genius with all of the top tier lifts that align perfectly with this list and these metrics for muscle building, and you're competing with someone who is just doing a random mismatch of a bunch of movements he saw on like T-Nation, if that guy enjoys what he's doing and you're not, he's going to smoke you. His results are going to be much better because you will not be able to compete with consistency. And consistency is key, not just in bodybuilding, in everything in life. You want to get better at something, you have to do it a lot. Piano, philosophy, learning a new language, getting really good at like bioengineering, doesn't matter. It's all about how much you're doing it, and how much you're doing something directly correlates not just with discipline, but also with how much fun you are having. Which I understand might be very confusing to hear, because you just clicked on a video called "Tier lists are stupid," and I just spent the last 10 minutes or so presenting to you a list of 10 different metrics that point to the opposite being true, meaning that if you use the proper objective metrics, then they're not stupid. And then I end with the most important metric being one that is not objective at all and just relevant for you. And that ends up being the one that matters the most and just trumps everything. But the truth of the matter is that this hidden subjectivity also applies to the rest of the list. Because even though I shared with you what I believe are objective criteria, there is one problem I didn't mention, and that is the fact that this is my list. And no one agrees on the list, because if you ask another YouTuber, they'll give you a completely different list with completely different metrics. Sometimes they're going to not rank them the same as I did. Sometimes they won't even include the ones that I included, and they're going to include their own ones. For example, this entire enjoyment thing that I think is paramount, guarantee you that some influencers would not even put enjoyment in their list because they think that it doesn't matter. What matters is just lifting, and if you lift, whether you have fun or not, you're going to get results, and that's it. In the same vein, you also have a lot of pro bodybuilders that would put soreness much higher on the list because to them, it aligns best with their approach for hypertrophy. So in truth, this entire video is a bait and switch. I'm not really talking about tier lists here. I'm talking about influence in general, especially in the realm of fitness, because you will encounter a bunch of creators who are going to tell you to do certain things based on metrics that if they told you the metric outright, you would not agree with. Example, and things that I did not include in my list because I think they're completely useless for hypertrophy, how your muscle looks when you're training. It sounds stupid, and you might tell me, well, no one uses that metric because it's silly. Go on Instagram. The majority of bodybuilding content that I see on Instagram is this. It's some guy who's very lean or on PEDs who is showing a lift to the audience that makes him look amazing, and that's that. It starts and ends there. And then you have a bunch of people in the audience who are going to do that movement even though on paper it's a garbage movement for hypertrophy. But because of the metric that this influencer used and the fact that they failed to disclose it, these people fall for it. That is the nature of a gimmick. And if we are to just stop shitting on bodybuilders, we can also look at strength athletes. Look at the amount of movements that are promoted because they look badass. What exactly is the point? How is that even a metric? Well, for a lot of people, it counts. It actually influences their choice when they program. So I think it's important to keep in mind that at the end of the day, the people you take advice from are human, and just like any other human, they tend to have their own little thing going on, and oftentimes what ends up being this new big lift that they push on you is just in line with their whims and fantasies at the time. Sometimes it's just something that they picked up and they enjoy it in the moment, and suddenly they think, oh, that's the next big thing, let me share it with the audience. Sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes some guy is going to do a movement, they're going to suck at it, and they're going to think, oh, well, that movement is the demon. I did that with incline curls. I couldn't make them work, so I thought they're bad. No, I'm bad. I suck. And this is also what makes tier lists so stupid, is that they tend to become obsolete sometimes within a year of their release. So if the gradation in the tier list is volatile, if it's not going to last in time, and if it might even be based on something that is completely worthless to start with, then what is left for us in the tier list format? Well, what is left for us is the concept of the hierarchy in itself. And this is what I was trying to do with this video. I openly shared with you how I create a hierarchy of hypertrophy to allow you to then decorticate my tier list and say, okay, now that I know that, it allows me to make an educated choice as to whether or not I want to listen to this guy. And this is something that I would like you to do for everything, not just fitness, but everything, because this is what we call critical thinking. The ability to figure out if an opinion is valid based on the system of value that created it. At the start of the video, I said that it wouldn't be a philosophy video. I lied, it's also a bait and switch, but I think that if I leave you with anything at the end of this long segment, it should be that. Because you will find that in life, not just with fitness, you will have things pushed onto you that are going to be incepted in your brain that don't align with your benefits, and the only way to resist them is to develop your own system of value and to be critical and cognizant of other people's systems of values. Not everyone is as transparent as I am, and the majority of fitness influencers are not even aware of their own system of values, so it's your job to figure it out. But I know that there are a bunch of people who are going to be excited at this opportunity to be transparent. And this is why I would like, and it's been a while, to extend an open invitation to all of my fellow noble natties, Bottomly Man, Basement Bodybuilding, Alex, GVS, Erzo, Fazlift. If you want, if you are excited by this opportunity, I would love to see your own video with your own top 10 most important metrics for hypertrophy, the system of value that you use to judge a lift, to judge a method, and to guide people on the path to natural lifting. And that also extends to the audience. I would love to see you guys in the comments share with me your own specific list. Take away stuff that I put in my list. Add your own. Tell me why you think that my list wasn't good. All of that back and forth helps us all build critical thinking skills, because I'm here preaching about it, but it's a skill that constantly needs to be worked on and reinforced. We live in an age, unfortunately, of mass disinformation, and that applies especially to fitness. And so to develop an eye that can actually spot that might be what will make the difference between people who get a good physique and the rest. But that marks the end of this video. So if you liked it, as always, remember to support the channel in the Ko-fi page. In the future, I have a very fun idea for a new type of streams that are going to be called Your Favorite Lift Sucks, where I will be taking in your messages and grading your favorite movement based on the list I shared in this video. If you're interested, that will most likely come in December. And if you want to consult the schedule, you can just check the community page. I'm going to leave you with that. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.